About a month ago, I made a video on why I decided to build a Voron printer, and specifically why I decided to build a Voron 0.1 printer. And in that same video, I spent some time going over some of the different hardware that I sourced, as well as my thoughts behind that. And I am beyond thrilled to announce today that the Voron 0.1 is completely finished, and I am incredibly happy with the end result. According to my main sales stats, I currently have over 35 hours of print time, and given its fairly small build volume, I would say it's safe to say I didn't waste any time pushing material through it, and I've already used it for some functional printing around here, and I've been very, very pleased with it. Now, I would love to stand here and tell you all that the Voron 0.1 build was a piece of cake and I just knocked it out of the park, but that would not be the case. And the build was definitely the most challenging 3D printer build that I've done to date, and I made many mistakes along the way. I felt that I had done quite a bit of research leading up to the build, but most of the mistakes that were made were definitely self-inflicted. So today's video is going to be all about my journey building the Voron 0.1. We'll go over the things that I feel like I did well, and we'll go over the many things I feel like I could have improved upon and mistakes that were made along the way. And my goal with this video is kind of twofold. The first is to hopefully prevent some of you from making these same mistakes, and second is almost to be a form of encouragement for anyone that is building one of these printers and happens to get stuck, that many other people I talked to that also built a Voron 0.1 or in the process of it have run into sections where you are hitting your head against the wall or wanting to pull your hair out, and that is okay. There are definitely some challenges with this build, but the end result is absolutely amazing, and I can guarantee you that it is definitely worth the ride. So there's gonna be a ton to cover, and without further ado, let's get right to today's video. Before we jump into the very long discussion about what the build and journey was like, I did want to take at least a minute here to show off the Voron 0.1 because I am so proud of it and I feel like it needs some screen time. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so let's first start off with the things that I did well. I think it's good to start off on a positive note, and it is also a much shorter list than the things that I could have improved upon. And so in the last video, I talked about a couple of sort of the different hardware things or tools that I got for the build, and I did want to reinstate that the little hardware organizer that I showed off in the last build, which you don't have to print out this one, you can certainly buy something similar, but I made this little hardware organizer for all the different parts for the Voron 0.1. This was an absolute game changer, and keeping things organized and neatly labeled will definitely save you a lot of time and headache. So whether you print out something like this or you have your own solution for organizing the different nuts and bolts, do that right away because you will not regret it later on. Second thing was using this WowStick. I didn't have this when I initially started, but I ended up ordering it shortly after, and one of the concerns many people had in the comments was the strength or the torque or the RPMs of this thing. And I will say that, yes, this thing is not the most strong or most powerful automatic screwdriver that exists, but it's almost a positive in this case because you don't have to worry about this stripping any of the screws. I ended up using this to get most of the screws in somewhere between 70 to 80%, and then because it also works to hand tighten, I would then just manually hand tighten it the rest of the way. But using this instead of some little Allen keys, yes, I should probably, but anybody doing this type of thing should probably get a good set of Allen wrenches. This is still an amazing thing to have, and I highly recommend something like the WowStick to, again, just take some of the turning out of your wrist. This is awesome. Lastly, if you are not going with a kit that already has some sort of a wiring harness, this was the best purchase that I think I could have ever made. And huge thank you to Greg from Greg's Maker Corner. He was the one that either posted this, it was either in his build video or he posted it on Twitter, I can't exactly remember, but I have had terrible luck in the past doing lots of crimping. And so I saw this, it seemed really good, and I picked it up and I used this for a ton. There was probably 80 to 100 different crimps that had to be made because I went with this PCB tool head that required a bunch of different wires to be cut and crimped. And so this was absolutely amazing. If you don't have a good set of crimpers, I highly recommend the Engineer. It's the PA09. I'll link all this stuff down below. And I think it was about $40 to $50, but worth every single dollar. This thing is a lifesaver, and I'm super happy to have it in my tools. Another thing I did really well was ordered spare parts. Again, if you're getting a kit, then you've got what you've got in the kit, and you can maybe order some additional things as needed. But being that I sourced every single item in this myself, I did not get the exact number on anything really, other than the big stuff like the bed, the hot end, some of the electronic stuff, but all the smaller stuff like bolts, if it called for 50, I got 80. Nut traps, if it called for 20, I got 50. Like, I mean, I went overboard with a lot of this stuff because I figured maybe some would be not the best quality, maybe I would lose some, maybe I would strip some, and definitely with the tiny little M2 screws, I think I ordered double. I think it called for 30 to 50 and I ordered 100. That was a really good call. Even one of the end stops, when I was screwing it in, I didn't feel like I applied very much pressure to it and it split. So having spare parts was something I think I did really well, and also something I recommend, again, especially if you're sourcing this stuff yourself. The last thing is the nut traps, and I believe it was both Thiago and Greg from Greg's Maker Corner that recommended these. I know he used the nut traps a ton in his build on his channel, but instead of sliding loose M3 nuts into the extrusions and then having to try to get them to sway back and forth to get in alignment with whatever you're trying to bolt or thread in, having these nut traps basically allows you to slide them in and set them where you want them, and they do not move. There was one occasion, I think, with the door where it was a little bit problematic where I couldn't actually fit in the things I needed because of them, but for 99% of it, printing out those little M3 nut traps, which I will show and I will link you to, is absolutely worth it. I think I printed out something like 80 to 100 of them, and again, they were a lifesaver because the couple of nuts that I put in that didn't have them were just a complete pain to try to get in alignment with the screw that I was trying to then thread into it. So those are the things that I think that I did really well, or the things that were a definite positive with the build, and I'm sure there's other things, but those were the key things when I was just thinking in my head of what was the most handy, what was the most useful. And now let's jump over to the exhaustive list of things that I feel like I could have done much better and improved upon, which is a very long list in comparison. And I will do my best to sort of sort this from earliest in the build to latest in the build for those that kind of want to jump around, but some of this stuff might not be exactly in order, but I will absolutely do my best. So the first thing on the list is organization. And I just mentioned that I was proud of my organization because of the screw organizer, and yes, I think I did a fantastic job of organizing the screws and bolts and nuts and all that stuff. However, the thing that I should have organized much better from the beginning was the printed parts. So this is much of the leftover printed parts, things I printed spares of, things that I printed once, wasn't super happy with the quality, and reprinted during the sort of initial printing process for this build. And this is after everything has been taken out of this bag and put onto the printer right here that you can't really see that well. And so you have to imagine this bag was, 10 to 15 times more full than it is now. And so for each and every little part, having to dig around here and try to find some of these tiny parts was absolutely ridiculous. And so a couple recommendations I would have is to separate your printed parts by section before even attempting to start the build. And things like the skirts and the panel mounts and the top hat, either wait to print that stuff till later on, or if you do print it beforehand, which is totally fine, just keep it completely separate. There are so many pieces for the panels that were in there that just made it impossible to try to find things. And so again, it might seem obvious for me. I was trying to keep everything organized in one neat bag, but it did not do me any favors, and it took me a lot of additional time trying to find what felt like a needle in a haystack. While we are on the subject of printed parts, that is somewhere else that I also think could have used a bit of improvement on my end. I was really happy with the quality of parts that I got off of the BQ-B1, but there was one mistake that I feel I made that definitely cost me some time and I don't know, blood vessels in my hand or blisters on my hand. And that was the usage of brims. I printed all of the parts for this build using brims. And although most of the brims were very easy to remove and didn't cause any issue, on the nut traps, the M2 nut traps that you use right at the beginning for the little M2 nuts that help you line up your linear rails, any sort of brim or brim residue on there, the tolerances are so tight that it is going to kill you. Trying to get those nut traps to slide into the extrusions was absolutely the most difficult thing ever, and it took so much force, and in a lot of instances they ended up breaking into multiple pieces. So what I ended up ultimately doing after the first two going incredibly horribly, was I reprinted them with the exact same settings, and I just removed the brims and they slid in like butter. So definitely, if you are going to or need to use brims, then make sure for at least the nut traps that have really, really tight tolerances that you turn them off for those, because again, it was just a complete nightmare to do so. And while on the subject of those little M2 nuts, one other thing I recommend doing is, if you're going to be putting the M2 nuts into the nut traps and then sliding them into the extrusions, test all of the M2 nuts to make sure that they were actually machined properly and have good threading. It might sound tedious, but it's really not that bad, and it's much less tedious than loading them up, trying to drill or thread your linear rail into it, and then finding out that one of the nuts is bad, it doesn't have a proper thread, having to remove the entire thing and redo it. So just take an M2 screw that came from the build, take the M2 nuts, and quickly thread it on the end just to make sure that they thread smoothly, something I wish I had done early on. So I made a mistake on the first page of instructions, and on the first page of instructions for the Voron, it shows a part which is going to be for the bed, and it shows 2 heat inserts going into that bed and then a end link of the cable chain. And silly me thought that maybe it was just there to show an example of what they would be showing in the future, and not that like, no, this is actually the first thing you should be doing. And so I completely finished my frame, then realized I forgot to put that link on, tried to remove the bed with the linear rails and damaged one of the linear rails in the process, which absolutely sucked. So part of it was, yes, me just not thinking very clearly, and part of it was I never built a Voron before. I wasn't exactly sure how the layout of the manual was gonna be, and so after building it, I can tell you that there is nothing there by chance or by accident. If things are there, follow them in the set path that they are laid out, and every single detail matters. So again, it was a stupid mistake on my part. I hope you don't make it. The first thing you should do is make sure that you put that cable chain and those heat inserts onto that printed part and avoid this mistake. If you see me smiling, it's because as I'm telling you all of this, I am reliving the many, many late nights. And again, I hope that this is helpful and that it will help you to avoid some of these silly things. So the next thing was regarding the heat inserts, and this was also incredibly frustrating. Initially, I had sourced the specific ones from AliExpress that were listed in the BOM. However, while I was waiting for them and talking to a few different people about the build, one of them recommended some heat inserts over on Amazon, and I did go ahead and order those ones off Amazon and started inserting them into all of the printed parts. However, while I was doing that, I noticed that it seemed that they were a little bit big for the printed parts, but thought to myself, well, maybe it's the ABS that shrunk a bit, or maybe the screws are only going to be going in from the front side and not down the back side of the part, so it won't really matter if these heat inserts are sort of collapsing the cavity of printed plastic behind it. And so I did that, I started the build, and when it came time to insert things in, I was spending time torquing M3 screws through the heat inserts, trying to push out the plastic that had collapsed behind. And one night when I was sitting here trying to figure out how the hell this could be, especially, I've used a lot of heat inserts before. I mean, the turntable build up there had a ton of heat inserts, and so I don't know why I didn't see a red flag earlier on, you know, go figure, hindsight, but I went ahead and grabbed the initial ones that I sourced from the BOM, grabbed my calipers, and discovered that the ones from the BOM had a 5mm outer diameter, while the ones that I sourced from Amazon had either a 5.5 or a 5.6mm outer diameter, which is substantial, especially when we're talking about such a small part that needs to thread into a printed part that's quite literally melting some of the plastic. So make sure you get the correct heat inserts, and if something seems off, double, triple check it because it probably is off. I don't know if it was late at night or what the hell I was thinking, but that is something I should have caught earlier on. And once I did discover that, there were some parts on the frame that I just couldn't remove. They were too far, I was too far into the build, but I did reprint out a few of the parts so that way I could use the appropriate heat inserts, and everything went way smoother when it came to threading them in from that point onward. Next, and definitely the most frustrating piece of the build for me, was the X carriage, specifically the part that the two belts route through, which then attaches to the X linear rail and is what your hot end and extruder, the mini afterburner, attaches to. And the issue initially for me was when I got the belts through this part, I tightened it to the linear rail, and then I tightened the belts, and that caused too much pressure and the part ended up cracking. So I reprinted it out and then tightened it before putting it on the linear rail, which is definitely a better method to go. You should tighten the belts before you bolt that little part down to the linear rail. It still kept cracking. No matter what I did, it kept cracking, whether it was a tiny little hairline fracture or whether it was, in some cases, a big chunk coming out. I don't know why it kept cracking. I tried everything from barely torquing the thing in, and I tried different printing parameters, and no matter what I did, somewhere on that X carriage piece, it would crack or it would split. I got some footage or some videos of the different broken ones. They're a bit extreme because once they started breaking, I quite literally raged and just broke them even more because I was getting so frustrated because when you get this part on and you get the whole hot end on there, if you have to take it all off again, which I had to do at least 4 or 5 times, it is not a fun process. You have to undo your cables, you have to undo the belts, like it's a pain in the ass. And so I don't actually have an answer as to why this happened. I wish I did, but I only had my 2 spools of ABS from eSun, and that's what I was using for this entire build, and they were great for it all. But this particular part just kept breaking. So my end solution, which is what worked for me, was I actually ended up printing out the X carriage mount out of carbon fiber nylon. And the reason why I chose that material was it had the proper heat deflection. Nylon is an incredibly strong material, and combining that with carbon fiber, it gives it the stiffness needed because I didn't want that part to have a lot of flex. And again, it's been assembled and now printing for 35 hours, and there is no sign of any sort of wear or cracking. So that worked for me. I'm not saying you have to do that. A lot of people use ABS on that part, but for whatever reason, I don't know whether it was, you know, again, a slice, something with the way it was being sliced was leaving a part that was just vulnerable to stress or what the hell it was, but that was a very frustrating part, and I was so happy that the carbon fiber nylon ended up doing the trick for me. So next up is actually related to the mini afterburner, and when assembling it and you're inserting the fans into the mini afterburner, be careful not to damage the wires coming off of the fans. They are really, really thin and super delicate, and what ended up happening is the fan that is the 5-volt fan that actually cools the heatsink, you need to route the cables above one of the layer cooling fans, and when I did that, it caused enough pressure to basically strip the wire back and expose it. And so what I ended up doing was taking some really, really thin heat shrink tubing, heating it up, and then carefully sliding it back in, but just be very careful with the fans again because they're delicate. And then I had one instance where one of the blower fans was too tight inside of the mini afterburner housing and it wasn't spinning correctly. So I would actually recommend, if you can, before you go ahead and install it to the X carriage, to test to make sure all the fans are spinning freely. And I just took a extra crappy USB cable, chopped off the end, took the 5-volt line, and then put them to the pins of all the fans. Even though 2 or 24 volts, it still was enough for it to at least spin and me to see, like, yes, this is fine if you've got a desktop power supply or whatever. But I do think that testing the fans just to make sure they spin freely before bolting everything in and zip tying your wires is definitely a good recommendation. All right, and the last issue I ran into was regarding the panels. I ordered my panels from Printed Solid, and they were roughly 3.2 millimeters, give or take, in thickness. And initially, I didn't, when I printed all the parts before I even ordered the acrylic panels, I didn't even think about that. So I initially had printed out just the default ones, which I think might be for 2 mil. And then in the STL pack that you download, there is one specifically for 3 millimeter thick acrylic, which I went ahead and started to print out. But the difference between the 3 mil and the 3.2 mil was enough for me to not like the angle that the panels were being kind of, the plastic parts were just at a weird angle. So I ended up having to take the Fusion 360 file for the whole Voron 0.1 over to Fusion and expand upon them. I think I ended up making the depth 3.2 millimeters, which was very, very close to, again, what the acrylic was, and ended up being a perfect fit. So it wasn't a big deal, especially because, again, the printer at that point was printing and I could care less about a little bit of a panel reprint based off all the other stuff I'd been through. But aside from that, once the panels are on, and the wiring was not very difficult, and the installing of Clipper, I used a combination of the Clipper Voron guide that exists, as well as the mainsail guide that they have over on their website, and it was a fairly straightforward process to get up and running. Thankfully, the only things I had to do was change a little bit of the configuration because I had one motor going the wrong direction and one motor that was just wired incorrectly, so that was just a switching up some of the electrical on it. But yeah, that was not a very difficult thing to do. As far as profiles go, I've been using a really simple Cura profile that I threw together. I think I took the existing Voron profile that was in there for a completely different Voron machine and just made some adjustments to that, and it's been running great. The default speeds are 100 millimeters a second, and I have bumped it up to 150 millimeters a second, and it's had no problems with most of the things that I've thrown at it. So it's been an absolute treat to work with and print with so far, and I've really been enjoying using Clipper and mainsail much more than I thought that I was going to. I did install a utility belt mod with some NeoPixels, and I was able to create a simple macro just to turn the NeoPixels on and off, which has been so fun. But yeah, I'm excited. It's been a really, again, just difficult yet rewarding build. So next steps really are going to be to tune the thing. I haven't actually done any of the input shaper or the pressure advance, and I've been so impressed with it without running any of the tuning that I can only imagine once I actually tune things correctly what this thing is going to be able to accomplish and just the different materials I'm gonna be able to throw at it. So I am beyond excited. And behind the scenes, I've actually been putting together a streaming cart. I have mentioned before that we have very limited space here, and I just don't have a permanent streaming setup available. So I built a streaming platform setup on a mobile cart, and the plan is going to be to stream the Voron 0.1 in a couple of weeks for anybody that's planning on building one. If you want to come and ask questions or take a further look at it, I'm gonna be hanging out, we'll show it off. I won't pretend to be a Voron or Clipper expert by any means, but I definitely have spent a ton of time over the past couple of weeks with assembling this and building this and banging my head over this, so I definitely feel that I've got a pretty good outlook now on what goes into at least the Voron 0.1 build. And so I also decided that instead of having the stream on this channel, I created a separate channel because I'm going to be doing quite a bit of live streaming, and I am aware that not everybody that enjoys this content is going to enjoy hanging out or more of a casual stream that goes on for an hour or two, or who knows how long. So I created a YouTube channel called ModBot Army. I'll link you in the description below over to that. If you are interested in things like live streams, then definitely go over there and subscribe, because that is where this Voron stream is going to go, and the more regular streams that I am planning will all be over there. So I am super excited. Let me know in the comments down below if you either are building a Voron 0.1, you're planning on building one. I actually believe I'm going to be building a second Voron 0.1 based off of the LDO kit, which I am so excited for, just to compare what it's like via me sourcing it myself and now taking this knowledge that I have from the experience, the positive and negative experiences I've had during this build, and just seeing how much easier it is to go ahead and assemble a second one of these units. So really excited for that, and definitely look forward to that. I know this has been a long video, but there was so much to cover, and there is one final thing before I end this video. I need to give some thanks to a few different people. Maybe not in any particular order, but all of these individuals were super helpful, and some of these people will be awesome resources for you if you're looking to build a Voron or you're interested in Voron. And so the first one is, I mentioned Greg from Greg's Maker Corner. This guy has been absolutely awesome. He put together a V0.1 playlist where he assembles nearly the entire printer. I wouldn't say it's exactly step-by-step, but it's pretty damn close to step-by-step. And anytime there was a question I had via looking at the guide and I just needed some reassurance, his guide was by far the most reference thing that I had aside from the official PDF. So his stuff's awesome. Go check his stuff out. I want to thank NERO from NERO 3D. He is an absolutely just stand-up guy, and he is a advocate for the Voron and Clipper space, specifically Voron, but he loves Clipper as well, and he's just been great. His live streams have been awesome. He's answered quite a few of my questions over on Twitter, and so I am definitely thankful for, you know, having met him through this and for all that he does. My buddy Thiago that I met, he has been also absolutely amazing. He sent me the PCB for the tool head, or for the umbilical cord, I think that's what it's called. And he also did a lot of work on the utility belt mod and just answered a lot of my questions as well. So huge thank you to you. And the mainsail team actually ended up reaching out to me, offering some support. They saw my first video on me planning on building it and wanted to make sure, since I hadn't used Clipper or mainsail, that I kind of knew what I was doing. And I ended up not taking them up on their offer because I wanted to see what it was like from not like a beginner's perspective without any help. Like, what is this actually like? But it was really cool of them to reach out, and so I'm really appreciative of them and love the work they're doing. Mainsail has been absolutely awesome to work with. The guide says to reference the Discord for questions, and again, there was a handful of people over the last month that I popped in at like 1 o'clock in the morning and just had this crazy question about something I couldn't figure out, and just to get some perspective or just to get a quick answer, and there's always people there willing to help. And certainly, last but not least, everybody behind the Voron project. Again, this is an open source project. I don't know if they have some kind of donation page. If they do, then support them. But you know, huge thank you to all of them for making this. This is just one, but these absolutely insane machines. The level of work that goes into this, I couldn't even imagine. So definitely hats off, high fives, standing ovation, whatever. Thank you all for your amazing and hard work. And you know, again, this printer build has been awesome. This community has been absolutely fantastic. And I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to end my rant on that note. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. We make a video every single week, so there's always fresh content coming your way. And if you do want to support the channel furthermore, I'll place links down below in the description over to my Patreon, where there are some really awesome rewards. Huge thank you to all of my existing Patreon supporters. I appreciate each and every one of you allowing me to come back every single week and spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all to enjoy. Last note, again, the description will have the link over to the Modbot Army YouTube channel. Be sure to go over there and subscribe, because again, there's going to be some awesome content coming over there, including the V0.1 hangout after this build in the next couple of weeks here, so be looking for that. On that note, this has been Daniel from Modbot, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.